experiment that we experience. And by the external, I mean the physical mostly, the physical that we can experience with our senses. So we treat this external world in a realistic approach, philosophical realistic approach. I will not go into it because we don't have time, as basically shared, as objective. The object of our experience is shared. We are in the same room, and we are all assuming that it is the same room, that we are sharing the same object of our experience. Yet each of us is experiencing this object from a completely different perspective. We can't both be in the same chair at the same time. Therefore, the experience of this room for each of us is completely different. When we talk about the internal experience, I'm talking about everything that Carla described before. So all of our psychic experiences coming from reflection, memory, analysis, emotions, but also our rational procedures that we take in order to process all these experiences. Now, that type of experience, the internal one, of course, is also non-ubiquitous because it's happening within our physical selves. However, we can think about ways of mediating it, for example, through poetry or other means of art, so that we can share certain common experiences. And I think yesterday was one of the moments when we could feel synchrony in our experiencing of our internal processes in that sense. So art is very instrumental here. Now, when we think about the virtual external experience, what happens is that we are given a completely new opportunity. First of all, we can consider the object that is shared if we are experiencing it in a virtual instrumentarium as private. As we sit here, each of us could be actually having a different space in which we are operating, and each of them would be, for each of us, completely private and individual. It could be, however, ubiquitous if we are sharing the same one, because we can have an experience in VR from the same perspective of the same person at the same time. We can all occupy the same first-person character playing the same virtual space. And we can have a potentially identical experience. This also creates certain opportunities for our internal experience and reactions, both reflection, emotional load, etc., in reaction to such experiences of the external world in VR, via, for example, recording of our experience as process. Because when we are doing a process in a game, the first-person game, for example, in a virtual environment, we are making certain moral choices, for example, which are completely private and difficult to share in our real life, because nobody can repeat our experience from real life in exactly the same sequence, whereas in VR we can do that. So the internal experiences in VR are potentially identical and ubiquitous. When we go to the hybrid experiences of the external object, of course we have a layered superimposed VR experiences with those that I mentioned before, superimposed on the reality that we believe is shared, the one from the natural experience. We can have ubiquitous elements that are recontextualized to a new physical place. We can have a mix of all of them. What happens to the internal experience? Yes. It's similar. We can superimpose certain private contents and certain private narratives, certain private expectations, reflections, memories, etc., over a shared object. And each of us can have a completely different experience now in the mixed reality environment to everybody else, although we are sharing the same physical and natural object. I will move now to the second part of my presentation, the genius loci. You probably know this term. It's a place that is defined as not just a space in two-dimensional, three-dimensional framework, but a space that, as Christian Norberg Schultz once defined, transforms a place from a mere environment, a space, where elements or phenomena take place, to a phenomenon in itself. It's a place that captures our attention. It's a place that inspires our imagination, and now we're moving into the internal experience of something external that's concretized and inspired and finished by our own creative powers, and that generates meaning, not just for ourselves, but also for our community. In summary, a place that has a genius loci is a contextualized space, yes? A space that has concretized elements to it. A place that involves us aesthetically through certain elements that become a foci of our attention. Without them, we don't have a place with a genius loci. The genius is there, we feel it, we experience it. It is totalizing in a sense that a mere space that for us is infinite becomes a dwelling. And this is a term that's used mostly by Martin Heidegger, as you know. Oh, I haven't flipped the slide, I'm so sorry. Sorry. So the first slide was this one. I wanted to tell you about the genius loci that we have experienced 3 days ago. Okay, let's move. This is the quote I read to you. Now we're here. So it's gathering and totalizing in a sense that we own it. When we enter such a place with a genius loci, we believe it's private because we are inserting our private experiences, our internal experiences, memories, expectations, reflections, emotions into it, and aesthetic responses that are not objectively there, yes? And therefore, we believe it's homey. If we remember the remarks that our friend Adrian made at one of the presentations about the feeling of alienation from the VR experiences, this is the opposite of what the genius loci tells us about a place, about a space. It's somewhere we feel at home, yes? Hence the dwelling. It's a Heideggerian term that Norberg Schulz also borrowed. Now, that place also has a direction, a sense of direction and an orientation, usually created by some element that's a focus of it. And I will give you an example in a second, what it means. And also, the last characteristic of places with genius loci is its identity, and identification that people can have with it. So it creates communities. It creates a shared experience that others can identify with and with each other through that place. Now my Polish friends can go to sleep because I will be talking about one particular place in Warsaw that they probably know very well. This is a roundabout, Charles de Gaulle roundabout, that is located in the very center of Warsaw at the crossroads north, south, and east-west. It didn't have that element until 2002 when the artist Joanna Rajkowska decided to build a palm tree that obviously cannot survive in the Polish climate. And it was received with great debate in Poland, and now, 10 years later, 11 in fact, it has become a pivotal, recognized place that everybody wants to meet at, that people even stopped calling Charles de Gaulle roundabout, we call it the Palm Place. What is the palm about? And why am I saying that this palm, as a, again, Heideggerian work of art, has recreated the whole space into a place with a genius loci? The title of it is Greetings from Jerusalem Avenue. Joanna Rajkowska went to Jerusalem before she made this piece of art and was under impression from places that had been obliterated during some conflict back then. And when she returned home, she studied the history of the street called Jerusalem Avenue. This is one of the roads, the one that goes east-west. And she discovered that there used to be a little village outside of Warsaw in the 17th century that was a settlement created by the Jewish community called the New Jerusalem. Hence, the road that connected that little village with the center of Warsaw was called the Jerusalem Avenue. That little village didn't last long because the Jewish community that had created it moved into the city center very quickly after as little as 20 years, but the place remained. For us, today's Warsawers, whenever we walk anywhere in Warsaw, what we experience is the feeling of loss. We walk and we know we're walking on the ashes of our ancestors who died in the Warsaw Rising, and especially in certain districts like Muranów, like Wola, we walk in the places where we can physically see gaps from buildings that had been destroyed and from the population and the community of our Jewish friends that have disappeared. This poem, when I walk from the Charles de Gaulle, the poem roundabout eastwards, always reminds me of that. I imagine those people who are missing. I imagine the Warsaw from before the Second World War. And it's a very powerful experience. And then I go back and right to the north of this palm tree is our university, where we learn about history, about culture, about art, about everything. And all this creates this completely irreplaceable genius loci for that place. Now, let's move to the content so you can see what can happen to this if we imagine that we move the Charles de Gaulle roundabout with its palm tree into the VR. We have lots of opportunities, and I think we also have threats there, VR and AR both. If we imagine that we are now entering a VR room where we can see the little village, the New Jerusalem, where we can see all the stalls, the houses that are missing. So they were real. We are reacting to them. Our own experience, not the one we are concretizing. It's the one we're facing. We're facing as an encounter with the other. Yes? It takes away the pivotal point that gives us orientation in the real experience that I just showed you, because we can now not see the vertical dimension of our own experience that's represented metaphorically by the palm tree. We can now just walk around like we do in the city, and I call it this linear flânerism, a term borrowed from Benjamin, which may defocus us, yes? It can take away the focus of the experience. The spatial extension breaks the sort of peaceful feeling of dwelling in that place, of its enclosure that we are now used to in Warsaw, where we can either stay there and contemplate, or we can walk out of, or we can look from into the perspectives. When we start doing this in the VR, we're simply extending in infinity, basically, because the space is infinite and it doesn't have the kind of enclosure for us.
Na uso wa jamii, kupanda shuka akawa tuzo, ukakamavu wake ukatii na kumfanya mwenye bidii. Kwa machozi na makeke akabaini jinsi ya kuwini. Huyu ni mwanamke ngangari kwa jinsi alivyo ng'ari ng'ari. Mimi ni mwanamke make. Usikose kutazama kipindi cha Mwanamke Mwake Mwake, nami Caroline Kimweli.
They are powerful and influential. They make decisions in politics, education, finance, agriculture, health, sports, and all aspects of human life. But the impact of their decisions falls on you, the common citizen. KUTV Primetime News Thursday, we ask bold questions and pursue answers to the core to bring you closer to the story. We couldn't have it any other way. Join me, Auma Evans, as I raise matters of social concern to raise your voice from the background to the foreground.
Hello, I'm very, very pleased to be here. My name is Bogna Gladeno-Bidzińska. I'm Polish. I'm a PhD in philosophy. My field of research so far was focused on art philosophy and aesthetics. And my studies focused mostly on recurring ideas in culture,